Stop for a moment. Because what you're about to read contradicts almost everything you've been told since childhood about what it means to be alone. You've been taught that friendship is proof of worth, that popularity is a measure of health, that loneliness is a symptom, something to be diagnosed, treated, overcome. The people around you, the culture you swim in, the algorithms feeding you content, all of it reinforces the same message. If you don't have many friends, something is wrong with you. But consider this. Tesla died alone. Nietzsche spent years in near-total isolation. Da Vinci worked in solitude for long stretches of his life. Kant kept a schedule so rigid and socially minimal that it became legendary. These were not people who failed at connection. These were people whose minds operated at a frequency that most social environments simply couldn't match. Did they lose? Or did they understand something about themselves, and about the nature of genuine connection, that the crowd never could? There are 5 psychological characteristics that appear consistently in people who live without close friendship. Not weaknesses, not deficits, something rarer and more interesting than either. The myth that has been quietly destroying you. Since childhood, a single equation has been installed in most of us. More friends equals more happiness equals more success. Social media has amplified this into something almost inescapable. Follower counts, likes, the curated evidence of a full and enviable social life, visible to everyone and updated constantly. But look beneath the surface of that equation. Talk to the person with 300 online connections who cries alone on Sunday evenings. Watch the life of someone surrounded by acquaintances who cannot name a single person who truly knows them. Quantity without depth is not connection. It is the performance of connection, and performances are exhausting. People who live without friends often have something that makes superficial connection genuinely impossible rather than merely unappealing, standards that most social environments cannot meet. Not arrogance. Not misanthropy. Something more like an evolutionary need for authenticity, a nervous system that finds pretense not just boring but genuinely costly. Here is what that actually looks like. The first characteristic: they see through the performance. The brain of a person with high emotional intelligence functions, in certain contexts, like a finely calibrated instrument for detecting inauthenticity. When someone says one thing and means another, they feel it, not through conscious analysis but through something more immediate. A subtle misalignment between words and tone. A micro-expression that doesn't match the narrative. An energy that contradicts the surface. Research consistently shows that people with high emotional intelligence report feeling more isolated, not less. The intuitive reason for this becomes clear quickly. When you can perceive the games people play, the status maneuvering, the approval seeking, the carefully managed impressions, ordinary social interaction becomes difficult to inhabit authentically. Imagine standing in a room full of people laughing and talking, and while you can see the laughter, you can also see, clearly, almost involuntarily, that the man across the room is performing confidence he doesn't feel. That the woman beside him is managing her anxiety through humor. That the conversation happening in the corner is a negotiation dressed as friendship. You are not superior to these people. You are simply reading what most people filter out, and what you're reading makes genuine relaxation in that environment nearly impossible. So you leave. Not because you failed socially. Because your nervous system told you the truth about what was actually happening there. The second characteristic: they guard their energy as a finite resource. Most people treat their attention and emotional energy as though they are renewable on demand. They spend them freely, on conversations that drain rather than nourish, on relationships maintained more out of habit than genuine affinity, on social obligations that leave them feeling emptier than before they arrived. People who live without friends have typically arrived, through experience, at a different understanding. Every interaction is an exchange. Some fill you, some empty you, and the difference is not always obvious in the moment, but it is always real. Neurobiology supports this with some precision. Sustained social interaction elevates cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. For people with highly sensitive nervous systems, this elevation is not trivial. It is physiologically costly in ways that can take extended time to recover from. This is not a character flaw. It is a feature of a nervous system calibrated to process experience deeply rather than broadly. But it means that the extroverted world's default assumption, that more social interaction is always better, that isolation is always a problem, is simply wrong for a significant portion of people. The person who leaves a social gathering feeling depleted rather than energized is not broken. They are honest about what their nervous system actually requires. Choosing solitude in this context is not avoidance. It is an act of genuine self-knowledge, the decision to protect a resource that most people don't even recognize as finite. The third characteristic: their inner world is more vivid than most social environment. There is a particular kind of mind that lives primarily in the realm of ideas, in questions, concepts, connections between seemingly unrelated things, the slow development of a thought over days or weeks. For this kind of mind, the majority of ordinary conversation is like being asked to swim in a very shallow pool. Not unpleasant exactly, but fundamentally inadequate. Too predictable. Too oriented toward the surface. Insufficiently concerned with the things that actually seem worth thinking about. Philosophers, scientists, artists, writers, the history of exceptional solitary achievement is long and consistent. Nietzsche spent months alone in the Swiss mountains, producing work that would reshape European thought. Kant's social life was so constrained by deliberate choice that his neighbors reportedly set their clocks by his afternoon walk. Tesla retreated so completely from conventional social life that his later years were spent almost entirely in the company of his own mind. Were these people unhappy? Some of them, at times. Were they unfulfilled? By any honest measure, no. Because their sense of meaning, the experience of their lives as worthwhile and interesting, did not depend on the number of people who knew them. It depended on the quality of the inner conversation they were continuously having with themselves, with their work, with the questions they found worth pursuing. If your mind craves depth, genuine intellectual depth, philosophical engagement, creative absorption, you will find that most casual social environments offer very little of what you're actually hungry for. You will look for people who match that depth. And when you don't find them, you will return to your own company. This is not tragedy. It is discernment. The fourth characteristic: they have stopped outsourcing their self-worth. Most friendships, if we are honest about their psychological function, involve a degree of mutual validation. You affirm me, I affirm you. You support my version of reality, I support yours. You tell me I'm doing well, I return the favor. This is not cynical. It is human. We are social animals and we are wired to care what others think of us. But it creates a dependency that is, for many people, permanent. They cannot feel genuinely confident without external confirmation. They cannot make important decisions without consulting their social network. They cannot sit with their own judgment unless it has been endorsed by someone else. People who live without close friendships have often, through the particular solitude of their experience, developed something different. An internal locus of evaluation. This is what it looks like in practice. Their sense of whether they are doing well does not primarily come from other people's reactions. It comes from their own assessment, based on their own values, their own standards, their own observation of whether they are living with integrity. Jung described psychological maturity as the process of individuation, the gradual development of a self that is genuinely one's own rather than assembled from the expectations and projections of others. This process requires, at some point, the willingness to stand in your own judgment without the scaffolding of social approval. People who have spent significant time alone, not by choice of deprivation but by the nature of who they are, often complete this developmental step earlier, and more thoroughly, than those who have always had ready access to external validation. The result is a self-possession that is genuinely rare. Not arrogance, not indifference to others, but a stability that does not depend on being liked, approved of, or understood by any particular person. The fifth characteristic: they have faced the dark and not looked away. This is the characteristic that is hardest to talk about and possibly the most important. People who live without close friends have, in many cases, spent significant time alone with the full range of human experience, including the parts that most social life is designed, quietly and efficiently, to help us avoid: pain, fear, the awareness of mortality, the questions that have no comfortable answers, the aspects of oneself that are difficult to acknowledge and impossible to present attractively to others. Most social interaction, when examined honestly, functions in part as a mechanism for not being alone with these things. We fill the silence with conversation. We manage our anxiety through company. We use the presence of others as protection against the confrontation with our own interior. People who live without that protection have had to develop a different relationship with their own darkness. Jung spoke at length about the shadow, the parts of the personality that we disown, suppress, project onto others rather than integrating into a coherent whole. His central insight was that psychological wholeness requires not the elimination of these shadow elements but their integration. The willingness to acknowledge them, to understand them, to stop pretending they don't exist. People who have spent years in genuine solitude have often been forced, by the simple absence of distraction, to undertake this integration. They know their fears with some precision. They have looked at their own capacity for pettiness, for self-deception, for all the qualities we prefer not to claim. And they have learned to live with what they found. This is not comfortable to be around. It requires other people to do the same. And most people are not yet willing to. What this actually means. If you have been reading this and recognizing yourself, if some part of you has spent years quietly accepting the verdict that your solitude is a failure, a deficit, evidence of something wrong, here is what I want to offer instead. You are not broken because you are alone. You may be alone precisely because you are too honest, too perceptive, too unwilling to trade genuine depth for comfortable company. That is not a consolation prize. That is a description of a specific kind of psychological development that is, in fact, uncommon. The world will continue to suggest that you should want what it offers. More connections, more visibility, more social activity, more evidence that you belong to something. And you can listen to that suggestion and feel its pull, because you are human and you were made for connection. But you can also trust what you have learned from your own experience. That not all connection is nourishing. That solitude, chosen consciously and inhabited with intention, is not the absence of a full life. It is, for some people, the precondition for one. The loneliness you have felt is real. But it is not the whole story. It is also, and this is the part that takes time to see, the space in which you became yourself. Use it.